Is there a microphone? No, I don't.
No, you don't think you need. Okay, great. I hope you are all doing fine with the group work and with the report you are making in the PhD course. Today we are starting a new module, and this module will be about anticipatory thinking, and especially how can we anticipate the future when we are working with sustainability. And one of those things we need to think about then is climate, of course. We already had some nice climate lectures, but we will go more into climate resilience, adaptation, and nature-based solution in this lecture. And we could start by recapping some of the things you've already been told, but like these climate tipping points. Climate tipping points, this is showing, change in temperature over time, and we are managing it. It's maybe a little bit more drought, a little bit more flood, and then it starts to be even more droughts and even more floods, and things are getting more unstable, and these changes, and we are just in a way reactive to these changes, but suddenly you get this enormous change. It flips over, and you have a tipping point. And then you have some reinforcing mechanism which has suddenly tipped you to another state. And and it's irreversible, self-perpetuating change in climate. Sorry, I didn't remember I put it there. So then there was this science paper, I guess, which André also talked about, where you have these multiple climate tipping points that we can expect if climate warms beyond 1.5 degrees. And you remember these blue ones being melting of permafrost and West Antarctic ice sheet and the Greenland ice sheet. When it comes to permafrost, you could already observe that, and in Svalbard you already observe quite different permafrost status with different difficulties with access, more landslides, more avalanches, and it's the same also in parts of Alaska, where you have to actually move settlements because of coastal erosion and permafrost instabilities and flooding. So it's worse off elsewhere in Arctic, but in the Arctic we feel it the most. And then you have a range of biome shift. Yeah, like probably Varanger will be covered by forest in the future. In a near future even, you could already see the tree line moving northwards there, and also in the mountains. And you could, and when it comes to this model here in 2022, they show that it's very near a tipping point in Amazonas. And what happened this year? There was a terrible drought in Amazonas, and it doesn't, and a lot of rainforests die back. Fish difficulties to get access to fish. It has been a big catastrophe in Amazonas rainforest. So these models actually said that it's unstable in Amazonas, and you can be near a tipping point. And it seems like something happened this year. We don't know yet if it was a tipping point or just an event, but the models predicted that you were near. And you have this, of course, this Sahel region, which is, you also have a lot of drought. That has been for a very long time. And then you have which is maybe even more interesting up here. It's of course interesting for us what's happening in the world, but for us, we actually might risk a regional cooling, because the Atlantic meridional overturning circular breakdown is getting weaker. They are showing it's getting weaker. And that means that less warm water will come up to the north, which means a cooling phase. And if you get the freshwater influx there in addition, that's what actually happened during the Little Ice Age. So, so it's something that to keep in mind, that we are working towards an unpredictable future, and we have to train ourselves in anticipatory thinking. And that's a key skill in sustainability science, anticipatory thinking. I leave it there because this André has covered in his lectures. And then we are going in this module to talk more about transformative change and social tipping points, climate resilient pathways where nature-based solution is included. And transformative change you will have with Fern Dixon in a couple of weeks, so I will concentrate on climate resilient pathways here. So we have already talked about resilience, but there are some modification of this resilience concept when it's used in different contexts. And this is happening also with the climate resilience concept that has another meaning, yet another meaning than ecological resilience. And then we're going to say a little bit about climate resilient pathways, and then we're going to talk about nature-based solution in the end. So what is climate resilience? And before I get there, I might say something about those type of resilience you're already familiar with as ecologists. Well, engineering resilience you're not familiar with, but that's just one stable equilibrium. So that is used more to return to a single equilibrium after shocks or disturbances of some sort. But ecological resilience includes multiple stable states, as you remember. And it's the magnitude of shocks that can be absorbed before the trestle enter a new equilibrium or a new state. So it has a self-organizing capacity and learning. We went through that in another lecture previously. And again, you have these predictable and unpredictable factors. This one you could predict. This you include also that it could be unpredictable and suddenly flip to another state. And here, the emphasis here is on persistent adaptability, flexibility, efficiency, diversity to keep it in the state, the desired state. Now, the Resilience Center in Stockholm and those working with climate resilience are using more the socio-ecological resilience concept. And that's again different. Then you are not talking necessarily about, you could have different stable states, but things are continuously changing and people are adapting continuously to these changes. So you have this, you have also internal and external trust to how people manage these areas. They could deliberately be transformed to a new state. Right? So that's the difference. You could deliberately change things. And the point here is that you have, the human potential to transform is differing from this ecological resilience, where you just look at external shocks and how resilience are lost and you tip over to another state. So the socio-ecological resilience, I know it's very confusing with all these resilience concepts, but the socio-ecological resilience is the capacity to adapt or transform in the face of change in socio-ecological systems. So it's a bit different than ecological resilience. And two key things here is adaptability, that is human action to sustain, innovate, and improve development on current pathways and states. So you are managing in the state you are in. And then you have transformability, which is about shifting development into new pathways and even creating novel ones. Given the tipping points, the risks of all these global tipping points that has been documented in science. Perhaps we need this, perhaps we need social tipping points. We need tipping points that brings on to a new path. And then maybe just normal climate adaptation is not enough anymore. We need a new pathway to actually adapt to the changes that are coming. Adapt and transform. So just to tell what the climate resilience is good for, is the ability to prepare for, recover from, and adapt to impacts such as flooding, fires, heat waves, drought, and weather extremes, and so on. So climate resilience is about building a strategy for all these phases. But if you build resilience here, you are adapting, and the response will maybe not lead you over the tipping point, maybe not talking about the global ones here, but you will, if you build resilience, the disturbance will hit you less hard, and therefore you will not reach this tipping point, and recovery will be more easy. So it's just visual presentation of what is meant by resilience. You're not able to stop climate change, but you're able to mitigate the risk of climate change. So the IPCC definition of resilience and adaptation is resilience is the capacity of social, economic, and environmental systems to cope with hazardous events, fires, storms, floods, or responding or reorganizing in ways that maintain their essential function, identity, and structure, while also maintaining the capacity for adaptation, learning, and transformation. So it's the socio-ecological resilience definition they are using. Adaptation is the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effects. And it's to adjust to system to future shock, stresses, and other changing conditions in a way that builds climate resilience. Now, it sounds like it's very overlapping, doesn't it? That adaptation is about building resilience. But the point is that adaptation is not necessarily building resilience. You have an adaptation action, but perhaps it's maladaptive. It's not always that the adaptation actions you do are about building resilience. So if you are looking at this one, this is the, you have a crop field damage. Then you have the concept of coping. You would replant crops, the same kind of crops. If things are getting drier, shouldn't you have crops that penetrate more deeply into the soil? For instance, no, you replant crop because maybe you don't afford it. So the coping strategies is reactive response. Often people don't have other alternative than to plant the same crops, because otherwise they would need investments, they would need education, competence, new equipment. And many of these coping strategies are also keeping people in a poverty trap also, because you are always losing your yields or your animals if you have livestock, and you don't then afford to bring children to schools. You don't afford to buy a new equipment. You don't afford to adapt, which is here. You don't have the funding to adapt. But you could, what you might have a little bit of funding too from the funding mechanisms, international funds of different sort, is to do incremental adaptation. That is, when your crop failure, you understand that maybe you have to build some irrigation, and you could get the International Monetary Fund or someone to help you build a new irrigation fields. And these adaptation strategies are related to this local area where you observe these threats and you know what the vulnerabilities are, And you think that, okay, if I just build the irrigation fields, irrigation watering systems, that will help me come through this. But still, you haven't done anything with the new crops or new ways of doing things, and it's still getting drier. Maybe this is sub-Sahara region. It's just getting drier and drier. In the livestock, you are bringing in artificial water. You're pumping groundwater maybe for livestock to drink, but it's still getting drier. That's when you have to start to think about transformative adaptation. And you have to maybe consider that in some places people need to migrate. It will not be possible to grow anything or have animal in some areas. But you might also consider to use the land a bit differently. Plant trees or maintaining. You remember the paper we had where you maintain fires so that you bring away the bush, so you have so it doesn't exaggerate the drought. I should have shown this to you also, but okay, yeah. But in that paper, they go through transformative adaptation. So these are the choices you have in responding to these climate changes that are coming. Regardless of what we do today, we will need some climate adaptation. And if you're thinking about what it takes to do the different things, it takes enormous amount of resources to be up here on the transformative adaptation side, where you really need, if you're waiting very long to halt climate mitigation, so that we exceed 1.5 degrees warming, you will have a lot of crisis. The magnitude of climate response will be, we need would be much higher, too delayed. And you would need enormous amount of investment for transformative adaptation. You need to bring in lots of sector, because for transformative change you need both the private, the government and the citizen. Everyone needs to collectively go in the same direction, and that's an enormous input, an enormous task to implement. And it's also about managing power dynamics, or actually changing power dynamics from a fossil fuel dominated society globally to a greener world. And there you have people who doesn't want change, wants the status quo, and that's quite that's not, our whole society is built upon this. So transformative change is quite a big investment, and this is something Fern will talk even more about. And also, whatever you do, if you are trying to transform on a societal level, it comes with a high degree of uncertainty and risks, and also that you actually change mindset, values and framing. So it will take very long time to get the transformative adaptation necessary to meet some of these big changes that might happen if we exceed 1.5. But it's necessary, because if you are managing, let's say this is California, 40 million people are living in California. If you lose the fresh water up there from the snow-covered mountains, you won't be able, they are like growing most of the food for the US population. So you would lose harvest. Fisheries will be with ocean warming, ocean acidification could be jeopardized. You will have flooding, and you will have more diseases, heat island effects in the cities, sea level rise, more typhoon, loss of biodiversity, and changing precipitation level. And you have to adapt to all of these at the same time. So you cannot think in terms of incremental adaptation when you have a whole region as California to adapt to climate change. So what are the United Nations Frameworks Convention suggesting? They are suggesting what is called the climate resilient pathways. And this is where they try to sell it in as a triple win. And that's development trajectories that combine adaptation and mitigation to realize the goal of sustainable development. This means that mitigation and adaptation has to be a prerequisite in all kinds of sustainable development we do on the planet level. So whatever we do, we have to think mitigation and adaptation, and all the different sustainable development goals need to include that. That's what it says. And you have to combine incremental and transformative responses to climate risks in a pathway. You have to create pathways where you have concrete actions. And these alternative long-term pathways will then address, you have to also build in uncertainty for different pathways that could contribute to this triple win. And if you look at this here, this is what they mean. Has anyone been playing mini golf here in Tromsø at Storgata camping? And you are you put this ball there and you're waiting what kind of point you will get, yeah? And that you could think about the uncertainty of climate change. So the ball will go here and you never know which pathways it will take. But for each of those pathways, you should have a social response. And that's the point. For instance, here, let's say that we today started to phase out oil and gas production today, and we are finding new renewable resources. It could be wind, water, solar, preferably a combination of all of those, atom energy maybe even, yeah. So, yeah. But then you are still warming. So you will have some catastrophe leading you back to this path. And people would say, well, we have done all this, and why do we still get hit by extreme climate events? No, what is the point of this? No, I want to go back to, maybe it's not possible to go back anymore, but I don't care anymore about this green transition. So you will start to stop. So you will, so at this point you have to have a plan. When people are then hit by extreme event of some sort, how would you communicate? How would you prepare? You still need an adaptation plan so that people see that you are actually you had a plan for this. It's there in the plan that you are going to experience this, and you're going to adapt, and you're also going to compensate for loss and damage. So that could bring you up. People will get positive since you had a plan, and it will still go in the same direction with high resilience and low risk to be hit by climate change. Let's say that we delay climate change actions, and people start to experience a lot of these catastrophes. Yeah? And you have to be there and think that when they experience these catastrophes, you will be there with new pathways, both how to adapt, but also in, figuring out if we have gone very far, to what extent can we mitigate this and adapt to these consequences of it. Perhaps you will get back there and could go up to the high resilience, low risk pathway. So that's the point with the pathways. You have a lot of decision points, but at the same time, you have uncertainty happening, which could lead you to another pathway. And you have to plan for these pathways. And when you plan, you need to consider climate justice. And for instance, you need to consider low mid-income versus mid-high income countries. And the reason is, of course, climate justice is also about taking care of future generations, just to say that. Intergenerational equity is important. But when you make pathways, you need to think differently with the most vulnerable areas in the world versus richer countries. The low mid-income countries have a disproportionate impact of climate change today. And they are the one who has contributed the least to global emission. Right? So it's an extreme unfairness. They have to take all the costs of overuse of resources. And this, of course, has to be built into these pathways. Otherwise, we will not make it. None of us will make it if we don't do that. And for the mid and high income countries, they should focus on this carbon fuel development and try to phase it out. Even the International Energy Bureau says that now. So, and we should also help those affected by impacts of climate change. That's our role in these pathways. Through loss and damage, amongst other, because that's something new. And I was actually surprised that it was not already there. In the COP27, that's the decision, all the governments come together and decide about climate policy for the world. You already had the Paris Agreement, and you also already had adaptation strategies, but you didn't have loss and damage. That was new, and that's very important. There were many who was disappointed with COP27, but I think many of developing countries or the poorest countries in the world were happy with this, because finally you got a loss and damage fund for the world's most vulnerable. It was an important decision, which was not given enough attention in Western media. We were only focusing on the need to mitigate, which is important, but this is equally important because vulnerable people in the world will experience most of the impacts that we created. So we have to have some funds to help them recover after an extreme event. Yeah?
It's a cynical question, maybe a little bit of the devil's advocate, but why won't we make it if we don't? You talk about none of us will make it if we don't make this climate justice.
Yeah.
But why won't we make it?
Because people won't accept to be just taking all the impact from a problem we created. You will have migration, and they also expect that you will have some conflicts relating to this in the future, and also maybe trials against Norway for compensations for all the damage we've done. So it's also thinking about the oil fund. There could be a lot of international trials in the future for compensations. So it will be a more conflictuous world if we don't try to pull this together. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely will be. But if there's no resources to fight against the injustice, if people are hit with very hard climatic changes that makes them starve, that they don't have water, how can they fight for their own justice?
No, but in many cases they have to migrate. They are expecting migrations in the future.
And then we have close borders, and we have refugee camps on the edges.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So don't you think that people find their way in the end?
I'm not sure. That's why I'm asking. I really, I don't believe in this type of thinking.
Yeah,
but
I understand what you're saying, because there are people who think like that.
Yes. Yeah. And how to answer this?
How to answer that? But it's not really so easy to answer, because if people are not moral or don't care about other people, it's nothing we can do, right? It's if you have like in the Nazi, I didn't want to take contemporary conflicts. I was about to do that, but yeah, if people are convinced that Jews should be eradicated, you know, and are Nazis, what do you do about it? You know, you cannot do anything about it. You cannot start to argue with them because they decided that that's what they want to be. The only thing you could do is to build a community of people who support humanity, you know, and support human rights and support dignity for people. That's the only thing we can do. Try to build networks. If people decided to be an asshole, so to speak, there's nothing you can do about it. No. So you have to try to marginalize it.
And if you don't have climatic justice and like the richest survive, then we will basically say that we didn't make it because we didn't make a world that is fair.
We didn't make it. Yeah. So we cannot have mitigation policy that just an adaptation policy that just protect the richest, because we have earned so much funding, money on actually causing this problem, and now we can use that funding for ourselves to build renewable energy for ourselves and to be like moral high status and say, we have been so good at green transition, look at us. But we had the funding to do that, you know, and we had the adaptation readiness there because we had funding to do that. Yeah. So these are things that we need to build into pathways, that we have to think globally, not just us and them. Yeah. So yes. So it's so you have this. Where am I now in this lecture? Yes, it's the loss and damage. Yeah, so you have this stepwise thinking that the most important for reducing loss and damage in these vulnerable countries is mitigation. And for a long time, the convention, in the convention, the COP meetings, they didn't want to talk about adaptation and loss and damage because they were afraid that people would just shift them from mitigation policies to just adaptation. So therefore, for a long time, they delayed bringing in proper adaptation actions into the conference of the parties meetings. But now adaptation is there, and now also loss and damage is there. So you think about residual risks. Mitigation is the most important one, and then you adapt by disaster risk reduction and different kinds of adaptation mechanisms. But there are still residual risks, and you have insurance there to help in case something happens. But then you have this climate change element, and you have, in addition, loss and damage. It means also that you should regenerate after loss and damage, not just get some compensation, but also rebuild, relocate, support, humanitarian response, new livelihood programs, things like that. If you're hit by something and if things and these impacts are large, you need help to build up again. And this is a part now of the loss and damage funds in the climate convention. And it's just to look at the map to see where these vulnerable countries are, and you look at Africa and you think that perhaps we should do more for Africa since we caused the problem. And also, of course, in Asia, in India, Pakistan, and the Southeast Asian part of the world. So these are the countries who are most vulnerable to climate change, and it's dependent on exposure also, and also on the funds and adaptive readiness people have. And if you look at Norway is like on top here, we are the least vulnerable in the world. So we really don't understand, you know, what people would struggle with when it comes to climate change. We are well equipped. We will not be so exposed. That's one thing, And we have the funding and the adaptive readiness to actually do something about problems that occur. And this is based on food, water, health, ecosystem service, human habitat, and infrastructure, like key things that is important for people. And when it's come to adaptive readiness, we are the second. Who was the first? Was it? I don't remember. Was it?